Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest episode of Decipher the Media, the podcast where we talk to creative professionals in media. This episode, we have my friend Mackenzie Horne on. It was a real pleasure to have her on the podcast. I've actually known Mackenzie for about almost 15 years, over 15 years, I would say. So it was great to actually be able to sit down with her and really talk to her in a way that I never really got a chance to do before. So in this episode, we get to talk about what she does in creative media, which involves a lot of creative writing, a lot in the music scene, as well as a lot about how she got to those places. She does a lot for grant writing, and she's also very involved with the local jazz music scene. It was a very interesting conversation, and it was interesting to see how she has creatively expressed herself and helped her community in many ways. It's also wonderful to see that there is this culture that exists out there in the community that most people wouldn't be aware of unless they really look for it. And she kind of opens the door for that, for other people to see that there's a lot out there to explore. And the way to do it is to go out there and see it yourself and experience it yourself. And that was a lovely, lovely conversation that I had with her about that. So without any further delay, this is going to be Decipher the Media with Mackenzie Horne. Enjoy.
So I was actually thinking about this on the way over here today.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this about me, but I had like a sustained period of like a decade, a very long decade, where I strictly just played Harvest Moon in my free time. And it was exactly because of you, because my dad would drop me off at your parents' house and be like, don't bother me all day. And I would play your game.
You know what is funny?
What's funny?
I was going to bring that up, actually.
Really?
I was like, because I mean, how long have we known each other? Like, since you were like
8 or 9 years
8
old,
or 9.
probably.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, let's see. How old are you now?
25 now.
25. So I'm 4 years old, almost 5 years older than you. Yeah. And I just remember I have this vague image of like on like weekends when you and your brother would like come down to our house and your brother would like help out on the farm and then you would like go to my basement and play my GameCube and play like Harvest Moon and stuff. And I just remember that just like walk in and you're just like, milking cows or whatever.
As one does. Gotta go mine the ores and,
yeah.
Sacrifice herbs to the harvest goddess, as one does,
Oh, man. No, I used to be real into that, too. Like, I was really obsessed with that growing up. I had a Super Nintendo growing up, and that's, like, when the first Harvest Moon game came out.
Oh, man.
It was my brother's Super Nintendo. So it was, like, in his bedroom, but I would, like, take over his bedroom all the time to play Harvest Moon. And he would get so mad at me. He would just, like, always be, like...
Older brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he'd be, like, super pissed at me all the time.
I was actually listening to this podcast the other day, and it's this podcast for wannabe fiction writers, and... Okay. The lady who runs it is this crazy sci-fi author, but she is obsessed with this game called Stardew Valley, which is sort of really heavily influenced by those games.
Yeah, I played that.
Yeah, and she chalks up spending all of her free time playing this game because she's like, it helps me learn character development, and it helps me learn to, what to do and what not to do. And it's like, that's fantastic. That's great.
Yeah, if only like all the things that you learn in that game could translate into real life, like how to sustain a business and how to sustain a good relationship and all that stuff. Like, it's just like so easy in those games.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I want this girl to like me. I just keep giving her flowers.
Exactly.
Like, just every day.
Give her chocolate and
then,
wine.
and then eventually they'll like me enough that I can just marry them. I'm like, it's not that easy in real life.
No, the blue feather game is not that strong in real life.
It's just like, yeah, I don't think, you know, that might translate a little differently if I just keep going up to the same person and like, I got you stuff. And I was like, no, I'm getting a restraining order.
Yeah, I got you a PFA. Wow.
Yeah, so that's like, that was my first like thing I thought of when I wanted to like bring you on, was like, it was just like, I just like have this vague memory of that growing up. And of course, I would be like there probably playing games too, but like, no, I had to, since I grew up on a farm, I had to be out on the farm helping.
Right.
Which I absolutely hated. I was like, yeah, so I was like real happy to like get out of there.
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate what it is, and I understand how important farming is, but I couldn't not do that for a living.
I look at people who sort of got out of our hometown to do more artistic, creative things.
Yeah.
And it really is quite amazing, because it's like, wow, you know, like everything that we do now in terms of our creative lives was always looked at as something like, oh, you know, like that's a nice hobby. Like that's a nice thing you can do in your free time once you have your real functioning job that contributes in some way to society.
Yeah.
But it was never like a tangible, feasible career move. You know, so it's interesting to see people in sort of our age bracket breaking out and sort of breaking that mold in some sense, just because I never had a constructive example of that growing up.
Like, what do you think makes people want to do that, though? Like, do you think it's like an influence of the culture and how it like can kind of turn people one way or the other, like in favor or against it?
Maybe for some people. I know, speaking for myself, you know, writing and gravitating towards art is just something that I always did, without kind of having an outside influence. But I think the outside stressors has a lot to do with it, because when I finally moved to Pittsburgh, I mean, I just was inundated with all of these external pressures, be it, you know, positive or negative. And it really kind of pushed me off in this direction. You know, when I moved here, it's like, oh, this is a thing that people do. You know, people make goes of this. And it didn't take long to sort of undo the processing and the framework that had been kind of transplanted onto us as kids.
Yeah.
You know?
Because it's like, it's a very different world living out there compared to living here. Because, I mean, we also live pretty close to each other.
Yeah,
like,
you were like my closest neighbor a mile and a half down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it is living out in the country in the middle of nowhere. Not really in the middle of nowhere. Well, it was kind of. So, like, it's very culturally different. It's very... Like, I just remember I had this sense of growing up, like, it's just, there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go. What do I do with my time? Like, I don't really enjoy the things that most people out there do enjoy doing. Like, you know, for, like, ATV riding or hunting or what else? I can't even think of anything off the top of my head. You know, drinking at bonfires or whatever. I don't know, whatever the thing was that a lot of people did in high school. But, you know, so I think that's how I kind of gravitated more towards the arts, because it was like, it was more of my own getaway. And it was more like, I felt more at home doing it than anything else, and like I can kind of draw from. I don't know. I can't really remember what it was that kind of made me move towards that. All I can think about is I really like drawing. Growing up, so maybe it was drawing. I don't know. What was it for you? Was there one thing in particular that really?
Again, I think it was just a combination of things. I was and remain a very introverted person.
Okay.
Which is kind of easy to be growing up where we did, because again, there's so little activity that's going on around you. It's kind of easy to just kind of isolate yourself, especially when you're young.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that was a big part of it. Notwithstanding the fact, and it's going to sound like such a trope at this point, but whenever I was 7, 8, 9 years old, that's when book to movie adaptations were becoming really, really popular. Like that was like the golden age of Chris Columbus, Harry Potter. So that was kind of cool. And I'm sort of one of those people who was like, yeah, I never would have gotten into reading if not for this particular series or what have you.
You know what? Yeah. Because I think one of the things that really got me into reading was the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I was like super into when the first Lord of the Rings movie came out, and I think it was 2001 was when the first one came out. Mm-hmm. So I was 11, and I went with one of my close friends in school to go see it, and I was just like blown away by it, and just like the mass hysteria of it at the time, and how like it just blew up, and the movie was just like crazy, and then like there was like the Burger King toys, and there was like the Burger King glasses. They had like these gold glass
goblets.
Yes. I'm not the only one who. I had a bunch of those, and I don't know what happened.
I still have one. I still have one.
I had like the Gandalf and the Aragorn one. I really hope that they're at my parents' house, because I have no idea. I had them for a while, and then they just kind of disappeared. So I'm really hoping that they're still there somewhere.
That's going to be your retirement fund someday. You're going to dig those out.
Exactly.
And somebody's going to lose their mind over them.
I think I lost the light up cases for them, though. They're like those little plastic light up things.
Oh, rookie mistake.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, it was just like, when that just kind of blew up, I was like, oh man, this is really cool. And they're like, oh, it's based on a book. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go to the library, and I'm going to start with like The Hobbit. I'm going to read The Hobbit, and then I'm just going to like move on from there and just like get into that. And then I like started getting into other fantasy books, like, what was it? Do you remember like Sword of Shannara?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I started reading like Terry Brooks stuff. Redwall, I think, is that the one with the animals?
So the mice, I think.
Yeah, the mice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that kind of stuff. So I was like real into fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah. So were you in like Harry Potter? Was that kind of like your start?
That was the thing for me. Yeah. Super into that. And interestingly enough, I think the first thing, my mom actually still has this at her house, sort of the first thing that I ever wrote was like a really awful like 18-page mini Harry Potter fanfic. So I'm like 18 years old writing, or not 18, 8 years old writing fanfic.
You like started the trend.
Oh my gosh. Well, so it took so long to get internet at my house. I think I was 16 years old when we finally got dial-up. So we were super late to that game. But
I think that was just the area, because I remember I was like early teens when we got dial-up at my house, because I think it just like didn't reach out that far.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny to even imagine that now.
Yeah.
But it didn't take me long once we did have dial-up for me to sort of gravitate. I think that LiveJournal was like the first thing that I really...
LiveJournal. That's what I was trying to think of on the last podcast. That was before Tumblr was a thing.
Before Tumblr was a thing. So
they had LiveJournal.
It was LiveJournal, Archive of Our Own. Like there were a bunch of these sort of little...
I went on GeoCities a lot. Yeah. GeoCities were like my jam.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
People making their own fan sites and stuff.
Yeah. And that was so constructive. And I mean, for the most part, I mean, I got really good feedback on sites like that, from people who were obviously older, more experienced writers. And it It taught me a lot about what to do, but it also taught me a lot about what not to do.
Okay.
You know, so I did a combination of just sort of general fanfic and real person fiction.
Okay.
So, I mean, I guess in some way that's good character studies, because you'd have to sort of go through and do like these little niche research things. And it's like, oh, you know, this person gave this weird interview. Like, what is the context of that quote? And so, you know, we would build these giant elaborate backstories to just these little idiosyncrasies that happened. And so,
okay.
I mean, that was kind of the introduction for me.
Wow.
The first time I ever did a National Novel Writing Month challenge was because I had been involved in these fan fiction communities.
Yeah.
So my first NaNoWriMo was
really
like,
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never got into like those kind of communities like growing up. I think it was mostly that I just kind of did it. No, well, the one friend that I kind of did stuff with constantly. We drew together. We started out actually drawing comics together. So we drew our own comic book series, and we would always critique each other, and like kind of like we were always very competitive about it, like trying to one up each other on these like comic books that we were making. And then I think from there we both kind of got into writing, and so we were both like writing our own story ideas in like middle school, and like fantasy ideas, and like we drew from like, because we were both big gamers too, like into video games and stuff. So we drew a lot of stuff from like RPG video games that we would like play, like Final Fantasy and whatever was big at the time. But I remember that, and then I would like create ideas based on that. I would like kind of draw out concepts for those. So I wasn't really. It was more. On a smaller scale, I would say, like, because I was just kind of bouncing ideas off of like one or two other people, and we would just sort of like we would write these down on paper. Like we didn't even like use like type stuff up on like computers just yet, or I don't know, like writing on computers like didn't really kick off until I was in like high school, when I was like actually like writing essays and stuff. That was like kind of miserable for me, but you know, it was like, I think it was not until I got into like my senior year of high school that it kind of clicked for me. Like I liked writing, and I was always kind of praised for like being a pretty decent writer compared to, well, the area that, I mean, you know, I don't want to put down, you know, where we grew up.
It was a beautiful place to grow up.
It was a beautiful place to grow up. So the teacher I had my senior year of high school, like, for some reason, like, just really hooked on to, like, my writing, and, like, just, like, kind of pushed me to, like, go beyond, like what I normally do. His name was, he was only there for a couple years, at Berlin. Mr. Beck is his name.
Yeah, I remember him.
You remember Mr. Beck?
Yeah, I think that I used art teacher. Was he art?
No, he was a English teacher.
It was English. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that I might have had him like for one class in 8th grade, and then I think.
Yeah, I think he mostly taught high school, but and maybe he did some other classes too. But he was there for a little while, and he was like kind of like a big influence for me. So it was like people like that was kind of like where I sort of drew from. So I feel like we can relate in that kind of sense where it's like you're drawing from a community of like, you know, like-minded individuals, you know. So it feels like, you know, maybe that's where a lot of people, I mean, there are a lot of writing communities out there, so it's like, you know, to really get your start there, it's like, it's very helpful to kind of like, to grow that spark, you know? So like, where did you take it from there then? Like,
I mean, it sort of grew. I mean, in my late teens, I started getting some more some heavier life experiences.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'd been kind of insulated before that. I'd say up until about the time that I was 16, I was basically just drawing strictly off of these scenarios from these communities and whatnot, and writing sort of speculatively about things. But then I started to accumulate. It sounds really funny to say, you know, I was 17 and I started getting real world experiences. But, you know, I mean, that's really kind of what changed it. I mean, from there, it kind of went from being, you know, this sort of fun thing to a thing that I kind of had to do as like a therapeutic type of situation.
Yeah.
And I got into, you know, I did a little bit of high school newspaper stuff, but, you know, I went to college and did the journalism route. I minored in English, minored in religious studies. So you've got, and, you know, majored in history. So you've got all these really kind of interesting threads coming together. There was no shortage of inspiration. But to be honest, I kind of stepped away from it. Whenever I started going to Duquesne for my master's degree, it just was not equipped to kind of make that adjustment.
Okay.
And so the writing really went by the wayside, and it really wasn't, I got really far away from it for a very long time.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get like a real job out of college and you're just like, oh, you know, I guess this kind of is just the thing that I do for fun on the weekends, you know. But I was fortunate my last semester at Duquesne, I actually started hanging out with people at the music school, because the music school was right next door to my building.
Oh, yeah.
And a couple of the professors there were jazz musicians. And, you know, there was this club in Pittsburgh for a long time called James Street. It was in the North Shore. Had really kind of awful pub food, but it was really well known and had opened and closed many times, and some really famous people had played there and whatnot. But I walked into a jam session because a couple of friends of mine wanted to play. And the guy who was running it was an instructor at Duquesne. And I erroneously walked up to him and said, oh, what do you do when you're not here? You know, as if this wasn't a feasible job that a person has. But falling into that community of these people who kind of make the hustle work creatively, and that sustains them financially and emotionally, that kind of pushed me back into it.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was very, very lucky, because I, you know, had the situation gone differently, it again would have just been something that I'm doing on the weekends. But being around creative people really kind of just drew that out of me. And I think that if you're somebody who is really interested in the art that you do, you sort of subconsciously find these types of people. I mean, I know that I really don't go out looking for creative types, but I just sort of seem to just magnetize to them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's relatable in such a, you know, a lot of ways, honestly. And so would you say, like, it's like that idea of, you know, people can do what they love and make a living off of it. That was like what really kind of pushed you towards that.
I think so. You know, this person who kind of got me into the music scene here in Pittsburgh, he said something to me that I'll never forget. You know, well, two things, two really important lessons. The first thing that he told me was, if you find something that you love, if you love it every day, it's going to love you back and it will never let you down.
I like that.
This was just, I'll never forget it. Never forget it. And the other thing that he passed on to me was something that one of his teachers had told him whenever he was about my age. And this teacher had said to him, you know, what is your dream? What's your goal? And what did you do to get in the way of it today? You know, so all of these sort of obstacles that we create from within, because these outside pressures don't really exist. It's all sort of internal.
Yeah.
But just kind of overcoming that, and, you know, getting all of the extra stuff out of the way and having that sort of unfettered relationship, loving relationship with the art that you create is kind of the base of everything.
So how do you do that? How do you find the time to really do, you know, because more times than none, life can get in the way in ways that you kind of don't want it to.
Oh, yeah.
So how do you take, so you have 24 hours in a day. You know, how do you find the time to really dedicate it to what you want?
I think that my mindset on this has changed so much. You know, the stuff that I'm writing about now and the work that I'm doing right now is something I'm so enthusiastic about that it's not hard for me to look at it and think to myself, okay, this is the stuff that breathes life.
Yeah.
This is the stuff that really matters. And so my mindset has changed where it's like, okay, this is the thing, and you kind of have to build everything else around it. So, you know, I have a full-time job on top of doing the writing stuff.
Yeah.
And so the focus has shifted just enough where it's like, okay, that's just the extra thing that I do. Like the full-time job is the extracurricular. So, and I mean, you know, logistically, sometimes, you know, you stay up late, you get up early, you know, sometimes you miss meals and, you know, because you just don't think about it and stuff like that. But, you know, it's not really something that I have to think about anymore, which sounds very pretentious and unfortunately is not very good advice. You know, I've never been a person who is like, yeah, I have a steady writing routine. I get up early and I write 500 words before I go to work.
Right.
You know, it's hard for me to imagine something so rigid because I carry pen and paper with me everywhere. I take my work with me everywhere. And, you know, every free moment that I have, you know, I don't even have to think about it. It just sort of is something that I find myself doing. I'm not even aware that I'm doing it sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, so you kind of just have to love what you do. And it's not work at that point. It's just, you know, it feels like a way to release, you know, to get away and to sort of get into this place that, you know, you find true happiness. At least that's what I think of it in a way. It's just like, for me, it's like, it's a play space almost in my mind. And you know, in all the, cause I have the same thing. I have a day job that I do. And then I just kind of like, I do all this other stuff on the side. So I do the filmmaking, I do the writing. I have all sorts of kinds of projects. This podcast itself is like a project that I do. But, yeah, for me, it's just like, I don't know, because everyone thinks different. So it's interesting to like kind of hear how you do it, because everyone kind of has their own routine. Like some people do that kind of thing where they get it up early in the morning and like, you know, they get into the routine of things. And I don't know how they do that.
I don't know how they do. Sometimes I wish it was a little bit more like that. But I don't know, the chaotic principle in my life, I think, is the thing that kind of, I mean, it keeps you adaptable. I think the hardest thing for me is, although I am so in love with what I do, I have to work really hard to keep in mind that it's not who I am, you know, because you tie up so much of your identity in that. And, you know, as artistic people, I think it was Erykah Badu that said, you know, I'm an artist and I'm really sensitive about my shit. And so, you know, taking criticism and taking that to heart is really important, but not combining all of your self-worth up in that is something I have a really difficult time with. And that's the thing that I sort of have to work at most actively.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts on procrastination lately because that's not something I like to do, but it's something I find myself doing more of lately.
Oh yeah, procrastination.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I never used to think of myself as a person who did my best creative work at the last minute like that. But I'm sort of finding myself becoming that. I don't know.
It's amazing where your mind can go when you're under pressure, honestly. I don't like doing that either, but I end up finding myself in those situations where I'm just like, it's crunch time and I gotta get, like, I have a deadline like right now that I need to hit. And then your mind just kicks it into overdrive. And I just don't know, like, how. It's like you just pull, like, this resource out of nowhere. All of a sudden you have it at your disposal and you find, you're generating ideas and thoughts that you never thought possible any other time.
Yeah. I think that it's kind of a part and parcel of, somebody once put it to me, you know, if you start to put your eggs in this freelance writing basket,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes you have to think really creatively about how you get work and how you market yourself. And so it's rarely comfortable, but I feel like I grow so much better. You know, if I put myself in a situation, be it, you know, time-wise or financially speaking, where it's like, okay, you have to do this or you're not going to make any money, or you have to do this or your client is never going to hire you again. You know, it pushes you to do these things, and you just grow from being uncomfortable, you know? So I don't think that I really felt that way about it until somebody put that idea in my head, where it's like, okay, you can become adaptable and you can measure your growth and your progress in certain ways that you can't if you don't take yourself to those really sort of dire places.
So how do you distinguish, like, that business aspect of it, you know, when you have those kinds of constraints that are more of the business side of things as opposed to, you know, your creative inspiration? Like, how do you know, because you want, how do I put this? Like, you want to, you know, you want to let that sort of that pressure like push you in that direction, but at the same time, you also want to sort of have your own drive, like, you know, something that is self-generating, right?
Right. I think that, I mean, I got very lucky whenever I first started doing this, because the focus that I chose, I work pretty strictly with artists, with, you know, I provide writing services to artists. Most of the people I work with are musicians.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm lucky insofar as the type of work that I'm doing and the types of projects that I'm helping these artists with is something that I'm interested enough in that I get excited about it, and it pushes me to be a little bit more proactive.
Okay.
So, and that, I didn't really imagine that being the case when I started off.
Yeah.
All of this really sort of began because a friend of mine wanted to make a sophomore record. You know, his debut record was this really ambitious double concept album, 36 musicians deep. It's the type of project that nobody in their right mind would ever make, and probably never will make again. He says as much, that any of his subsequent records are not going to be anything like that. But he had undergone a lot of these really intense emotional traumas in the past year and a half. And he said, you know, I want to make a record. You know, I want to document this. I want to create this platform of healing for other people. Making records can be really expensive. And so, you know, he was like, you know, this would be a great thing to do, but I just don't have the money for it. And Pittsburgh is really well renowned for having some really great funding opportunities. There's a lot of donor monies that are accessible if you kind of know where to look. And so I said to him, I said, you know, let me write you a grant. Let me do this for you. I just want to try this. You know, I've never done it before. Let's just see what happens. You won't even have to worry about it. Like, just put it out of your mind, deal with your traumas, and just let me see what sticks. He's like, yeah, that's cool. So we applied for a grant with the Heinz Endowments, and it was an investing in professional artist grant. It was $10,000, and, you know, there's sort of scales in between. And so I checked a book out of the library and just basically filled out this grant step by step. I spent a lot of time researching the organization and stuff like that. And so we didn't think that we would get anything, let alone kind of the big award. And we got word back a couple of months later that we'd received funding. A couple of months after that, we received word that it was the full $10,000 that we had lobbied for.
That's awesome.
So that was, you know, there was a lot of upward momentum with something like that. It was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And he came back and said, you know, I know you sort of did this for me, but, you know, have you ever thought about doing this for other people? Because this is a really valuable service. And so I thought, oh, you know, like, yeah, that's cool. You know, maybe I'll go out and write some grants for some musicians. Maybe I'll do liner notes for them, whatever, you know, maybe it'll just be like a cool side project to do. And it sort of took off at a rate that I really wasn't expecting. So my freelance life is a very interesting combination of being proactive and being really passionate about these projects, and also being sort of overwhelmed by deadlines to the point where I sort of find myself fluctuating violently between being proactive and procrastinating until the very last minute with things. So it's a tumultuous place to live sometimes.
Yeah, it can definitely, at least from my experiences in freelance, like almost seem overwhelming at times, but also sort of exhilarating to sort of experience that, that drive and that passion and the, that constant need to just fulfill so many different roles, and, knowing that, this is something that's going to go in the hands of, others, and it's going to, in one way or another, influence other individuals. I think that's something for me that really, helps me to drive that home. I mean, I do a lot of this, like freelance work or writing or anything like that. I do, it's a self-fulfillment, but it's also like, I also enjoy the sense that, this is something that I can also, hopefully give to other people so that they can, find their voice, or find it, or in, or to help inform, or to help, persuade, or whatever it is. Such as, I'm sure, grant writing is probably a lot of persuasion.
Oh, yeah.
In a sense.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's cool that, you kind of fell into that. And then, so you're just kind of, using that. Are you using that as like a business model to sort of promote yourself and like to help others?
Yeah, it's a unique combination. So, that's kind of the backbone of it. And a lot of the work that I'm doing right now is sort of affiliated with funding opportunities, doing a couple of press releases and stuff. I'm actually working with, Con Alma, that club I was telling you a little bit about.
Oh, yeah.
I'm doing promotions for them because, it's this great restaurant, it's this great club, but on the marketing side of things, people really don't necessarily understand what the art form itself is about. And I take informing the public about what this art form is very seriously. I think it's a very underappreciated but very important cultural contribution that really kind of flies under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
So there's part of me that feels politically moved to do a lot of this stuff. But also, just the enthusiasm that I have for what I do seems to really kind of speak louder than my track record and my business savvy or lack thereof. Because I mean, I do a lot of record reviews, I do live reviews, I try to be present, and, that's sort of the thing that people remember more so than, oh, this person, the grant writing side of it is sort of a secondary thought. It's like, wow, this person is really striving to get hip, but she also does this thing. So
Okay.
that's cool.
So there's more of like, so you also do like more of like the personal like stuff, doing like passion projects and things that it really things that also interest you as well. And then how do you like where do you find those outlets to sort of display those passions? Like who like what's the process for you? Like where, from start to finish, where does it come from, and then where does it go?
A lot of it is building relationships, which is kind of ironic for somebody who is as introverted as I am. And I don't even view it as networking. A lot of people be like, oh, it's a networking opportunity. I don't like that word. And if somebody were to say, you know, are you good at networking? I would say absolutely not. But I mean, really just building the personal relationships with people and, you know, building a relationship with the content, building a relationship with performers, is kind of where all of that starts. The community that I'm part of is so small. It's really kind of impossible for me to go to a different city and not find somebody I have mutual friends with in the music community.
Okay.
So I guess in that sense, the networking side of things kind of takes care of itself because people talk, because it is so small, you know?
Yeah, so a lot of it's word of mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. I, you know, use a couple of online platforms. The main sort of jazz publication that I'm writing for right now is called All About Jazz.
Okay.
A lot of the interview opportunities and live performance reviews that I've written have basically come from sort of the editorial staff there. And there have been a lot of really unique opportunities. I mean, it's an unpaid thing, but the experience that I've derived from it has been just truly invaluable to me.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
You know, kind of one of the highlights of my professional career, quote unquote, which was an unpaid opportunity. I got to go down to Baltimore to go check out a really amazing club there called Keystone Corner. And I got to interview a piano player from South Africa named Abdullah Ibrahim, who has been a really big hero of mine since I started getting into the music.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, it was just not only really fulfilling as somebody who identifies as a jazz writer, but it just was very spiritually fulfilling because he's a deep dude. He's a really deep dude. You know, so that kind of takes care of itself too. I mean, it's a free platform, but I get a lot of traffic from that as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so you're doing what you love, but you're also building yourself up in a sense, right?
Yeah. The portfolio has grown significantly in the past year. You know, just from speaking passionately about people who are as authentic and genuine about it as I am. Hopefully.
Yeah. Where do you think like let's talk about the jazz part of things. Like, let's kind of break that down. So, like, based on your experiences, so you kind of got into that when you said you were in college or
yeah I came to it really late. Unfortunately, you know, I've always been really interested in music, and it's one of those things that for me it's really easy for me to go down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
So whenever I first experienced it, the thing that really struck me about it was I'd never seen an art form that was so publicly vulnerable before. Seeing it on a live setting for the very first time that I was exposed to it really helped.
Okay.
But I walked into this basement, and, you know, it's this speakeasy in the north side, and there's a whole vibe. There's candles. So, like, that, there's something to be said. I mean, you know, the power of setting a scene. But, you know, it was just these middle-aged guys on stage, you know, playing this music, and it wasn't even necessarily what they were playing. I mean, it sounded very nice, but you could just tell that they were really trusting of the audience that was sitting in front of them. And basically saying, like, hey, audience, here's my narrative, here's my story. I'm trusting you to receive this in some capacity. And there's this interesting reciprocal relationship that happens with attentive audiences, because this audience is taking this message, is interpreting it, and sort of transmitting it back in their own personal way. So it was really interesting, because I walked down there and it's like, I've never seen such unspoken vulnerability between people before that's really not being shrouded in any type of facade or anything. I mean, it was very uncontrived. And it was I was very taken aback. And so that resonated with me.
Okay.
And, you know, there are so many people in the community who are knowledgeable about the history and the tradition of this music. And they very quickly could see that I was enthusiastic about what I was hearing. And so they made sure to kind of get a hold of me quickly just to be like, hey, you know, here's the framework. Here's the historical precedent for all of this. So it just checked all of the right boxes for me.
Yeah.
You know, and you can start to see how this music is so much a part of everyday life, you know, not even musically speaking, but I mean cultural references to these musicians and, you know, the images and the icons. It's so pervasive in everyday culture. And so getting hip to this is like, okay, I'm understanding a deeper level. And this music is very, you know, it's very political in nature. It's very social in nature. There's a lot of history behind it. So it sort of opened up these new doors. It's like, okay, now I'm starting to see what is happening around me. I'm seeing historical precedent for these sort of social relations because of this music, which sounds, you know, it sounds crazy, but it sort of is kind of unlocking the key to a lot of, you know, a lot of history that's been sort of forgotten.
Yeah. So it's a very, it sounds like it's very intimate. It's very cultural. It's very, it's just, it sounds like a very personal, or it can be a very personal experience from the way it sounds.
Yeah.
What would be, like, so let's say, because you said it's kind of a very, like, a sort of more smaller group of individuals that are part of this community. What would be your way to sort of spread the word about this, to sort of get the message out there, to spread this culture, this intimacy with others?
A big part of it is person-to-person interaction.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I think the thing that is really key, especially for young people, is experiencing this music live like I did for the first time. Because I could put on a recording right now and you'd be like, oh, you know, that's cool. You know, it sounds like they're doing some cool stuff. You know, they're going to some cool places. But so much is missing. You know, even if you listen to a live recording, there's so much that's missing because it is so contingent upon relationships and you're sort of operating in a void otherwise. So, I mean, cost benefit analysis isn't fantastic, but kind of, you know, just saying, you know, hey, come out with me, you know, come to the club with me.
Yeah.
Because it can be really intimidating for people who really aren't accustomed to it.
Right. It's
you kind of come to it when you're supposed to and when you're meant to and when you need it most.
Yeah.
Because it won't always, you know, if you come to it too early, it's like, okay, I don't have experiences to rationalize this with. So it's all just about kind of speaking enthusiastically about it with people. And things like Instagram are super cool because, you know, you can, you know, live record stuff and, you know, that's interesting and people can sort of have this visual aspect to it because so many people, when they go to quote unquote listen to music, are still so visually motivated.
right.
And, you know, kind of the interesting thing about jazz more so than a lot of other types of music is there isn't necessarily that visual performative aspect to it. There can be, but there isn't always. And so I think that because it doesn't have that visual performative aspect, it's sort of one less obstacle between people and this really kind of, you know, emotional thing, you know, so there really aren't buffers.
Okay.
And so it can be really intimidating, but definitely person-to-person communication, intentional communication, and just being there in person is kind of the big things that I have found.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing about Pittsburgh that is very different from other cities, everything here is free. I mean, you can go hear this music 7 nights a week. You know, there are over 60 or 70 jazz-related events happening in Pittsburgh every week. Most of them are free. So it's really easy to tell people, like, hey, come have a hang with me. Come have a drink with me. There's no cover charge. You know, we can go hear this killing band, get some bitchin' food, and not have to pay a cover charge. I mean, you can't go other places and experience something like that. So kind of lucky geographically speaking.
Yeah. Like, being an outsider and kind of looking in at this, I would probably, or I am actually, I'm kind of intimidated by it because I don't really know what to expect. I mean, it's it would be for anything for like that I'm not accustomed to, that I just, you know, it's like taking that first step into, you know, new territory. And so like, if, you know, since I am a person who is not used to this sort of environment, this sort of culture, this experience, like how can you convince me to sort of try it out for the first time?
I think, so you and I were talking about sort of prog rock, prog metal before we kind of started recording. And the genre is so diverse. A lot of what is sort of identified as jazz, if the average listener was hearing it, they'd be like, no, that's not what I think of. Like, most people think of, like, you know, they think of Sinatra, or they think of bebop, or they think of these really kind of straight ahead things.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you're a person who's super into classic rock, I could be like, oh yeah, you know, Frank Zappa toured with this guy named George Duke. George Duke is a jazz musician. You know, he played with Cannonball Adderley. So, like, I'm lucky because I kind of came into the genre with sort of outside knowledge of these other genres. I was a huge classic rock, prog rock fan whenever I was a kid.
Right.
And so by having these conversations with you and finding out what it is that you do like, I'm sort of aware enough of what's happening in the jazz scene where I can be like, oh, you like this? Well, maybe try this. It's a little bit different. Like, you know, especially for people like us where it's like, oh, you're like super into fantasy, but also like crazy electric rock. Here's Return to Forever by Chick Corea. Everything sounds like a Sonic the Hedgehog soundtrack, but it's amazing. So it's just kind of finding the connections. And there are a lot more than most people would suspect, I think.
Yeah, I listen to I've listened to some bands that have jazz influence in them. Like, a lot of progressive is like influenced by other genres. So like, I guess that in a sense that would be like my in for that sort of thing. Like, have you ever heard of the band? Well, it used to be called The Reign of Kindo.
I don't think so.
I think they're heavily influenced by like jazz and like other things, but it's a very interesting like mix of what they do. I've seen them play live and they're amazing. But that's awesome. That's like one of those bands where, I mean, I could say like they are sort of like, you know, certain genres or certain music is sort of like a gateway into other things. And that's like one of those things that really, it sort of made me look into, because they're also sort of progressive too. So like, it made me, but they're softer. They're like not like a progressive metal, progressive rock. They're like a softer sounding most of the time. And it made me like kind of explore other genres in a way.
Yeah.
So it's like I definitely can understand that there's connections there musically. And then for anyone who, let's say that, okay, let's say I'm a history buff. Like, I really like history. You mentioned there's a lot of history behind jazz. So like, how would that, you know, influence, like what would you use to influence me to, you know, kind of get into that more, that side of things?
So it would be really easy in a city like Pittsburgh, because a lot of people really don't know how historically important it is in terms of this music. Pittsburgh's sort of a convenient halfway point between Chicago and New York.
Right.
So all of these people that we associate as being sort of iconic giants, so people like Ellington and people like Louis Armstrong were making these runs back and forth, and they'd stop in Pittsburgh. And I mean, big names in the scene, people who sort of redefined the genre, were born here. A lot of them were born in Pittsburgh's Hill District, which has a very complex history for anybody who has lived in this city long enough. So you get sort of this different view of Black history in particular.
Yeah.
You know, and it really kind of just, and it's a tradition that expands really far back. I mean, the roots of jazz are basically founded in sort of, the Friedman's tradition in combination with European classical music. So you have these elements from Africa, these ancient elements in terms of rhythm and instrumentation and whatnot,
Right.
being combined with these sort of 17th and 18th century European classical elements. So it's interesting once you start sort of taking an ethnomusicological view of all of it, because it's like, wow, I can sort of start to grasp at where these threads are. And you can see how, okay, this Kamasi Washington made this album in 2018, but I can see the roots. You can see these ancient African roots in it, but I can also sort of see these classical roots. But he's taking a film soundtrack from a film that was made in the 1960s. So you see all of these sort of weird connections being made. And like I said, Pittsburgh's kind of the perfect place to kind of get into that if you are interested in history, because just so many roots. A lot of these people are actually still alive. We're very lucky here because a lot of these legends who were sort of coming of age in the 1960s, some of them are still around. Yeah, and so an interesting Pittsburgh connection for people who grew up and kids who grew up in and around Pittsburgh. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is obviously huge,
right,
in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
The gentleman who played Handyman Negri is a guy named Joe Negri, who is a very talented guitar player who has seen a lot of history and lived a lot of history. He's still alive. He's in his early 90s. You can go out and catch him performing places. He used to have a regular gig at the Omni William Penn Hotel downtown. So, I mean, he's still here. Guys who have played with people like Erykah Badu, they're here. So it's just kind of a matter of going out and finding them. And the stories that you hear just kind of puts things into better perspective, and it fits things into the bigger picture, especially in terms of race history and minority history and whatnot.
Right. And that's very important because, especially in, times like these, it's hard to it's easy for some people to forget, where we come from and how far we've come as a community, and the struggles that certain individuals had to go through, in previous decades. And I feel like that's a great reminder of, the big picture and what is important about community and likeness and just the melding of cultures and understanding each other as a whole. So that's kind of what I take from that, and that's I feel like that's definitely something like jazz would be an important piece to that. What would be your takeaway from it? What's something that you find to be the thing that's influenced you the most from it?
I think kind of the thing that you're hitting on, that culture of empathy that sort of comes from interacting with music from the past, practitioners of it now, writers of it now. And also just kind of, for me anyway, what seems to be kind of inherent spirituality of all of it. I'm not a religious person and don't ever really consider myself to be a very spiritual person either. But something about this music, I think probably because it doesn't necessarily have to have lyrical content to it, really kind of speaks to me in a really profound way, and it allows me to kind of interpret it. So I moved to these really sort of valid, powerful emotions because of it. So that, in conjunction with the fact that I'm really kind of tapping into some sort of higher level of empathy, really just kind of makes it an overwhelming force in my life. And it's hard because it takes it beyond something that I enjoy to something that is necessary for me to kind of get through a day.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing about it, and people who are sort of on that same wavelength It's inexplicable, but it's definitely there. It does kind of make me feel alienated sometimes, because to try and explain it to people who are like, oh, like this sounds nice, you know, like it doesn't have to be this really heavy thing, but my reasons for listening and participating in and consuming this music goes sort of beyond just basic enjoyment.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make it a more valid experience or an invalid experience, what have you. But those are just kind of, you know, it's made me more self-aware by being largely more aware of the bigger picture as well.
Yeah. And how would you explain, like, from somebody who's not, like, they want to understand, you know, the meaning behind this music. They want to understand the true meaning, the underlying message or the takeaway from it, you know, that's not there from just listening to the song, just listening to, you know, like you're driving in your car and you're just listening to it. Like, how do you break that down for someone who might not see that?
I would suggest that people be a little bit more comfortable with silence, because there's a lot of introspection that happens in silence. So if you're just sort of taking something in, if you're taking this music in and you don't have any expectations of it, going in without expectations is really, really important. And it's interesting because that's something that translates really well to personal relationships too. Just sort of going in, not having expectations on the music, not having expectations on yourself, and just sort of allowing yourself to have this somewhat meditative experience.
Yeah.
Thinking of it as something good that you do for yourself. You know, if you're in a car and you're listening to music, like you said, you know, it's just sort of, maybe it's a thing you do to kind of stay awake. Maybe it's just something, you know, we're fundamentally uncomfortable with silence, and we're fundamentally uncomfortable with this sort of very public introspection. You know, kind of the way that I would encourage people is, you know, it is a safe space. The community members who are really into it get it, and they don't expect anything from you. They're not putting pressure on you to feel a certain way. They don't expect you to have this sort of religious experience, you know, and understand that it is something that you do for yourself, and it is inherently selfish and selfless. So if you think of it as a good thing that you do for you, it kind of, you know, just kind of changing the slant just a little bit.
Yeah. Because I'm sure, like, everyone's going to find something of their own in it. Like, it's not just one defining trait that is going to be the takeaway.
Right.
Is that right?
Right.
Okay. And so each of us, through our own experiences, I would think, are going to find something that, you know, some value that is different from any other individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to revisit certain things. I know when I first started listening, you know, it's kind of a gradual thing. I think a lot of people just sort of start off thinking, oh, you know, I like the sound of that. That's a weird synthesizer. I like the way that sounds in my ear. And,
Yeah.
which is a totally valid experience. There's a lot of really technical, amazing things that happen. But I have found that there were things that I listened to when I first started trying to get hip that didn't make any sense to me then. It just was like, this is so far beyond me. I can't enjoy this. And now I go back and revisit some things, and because of the experiences that I've accumulated between then and now, it's like, oh, this makes sense to me. This is really profound now. And it is sort of this weird organic thing where some days I wake up and it's like I might have hated this particular artist or hated this particular record forever, and then just wake up one day and it's like, oh, I get it now. So it's kind of a gift you can keep giving yourself, because it doesn't have to mean the same thing every time. And that's kind of the amazing thing about listening to music that doesn't have lyrics. And, you know, as somebody who's interested in instrumental music, I'm sure you get this. You don't have people dogmatically telling you what to think. They aren't building the story for you. It gives you so much freedom, you know? And I think for artistic people, it's like, okay, I have this soundscape to play with. I can create whatever narrative I want.
Yeah, it's very, you sort of create almost your own soundtrack from the music, like especially if it's instrumental. Like I create, kind of define my own soundtrack from it, like say it's like a movie soundtrack, something like that. Like I visualize how this music plays into like a scene from a movie. I mean, I'm also like kind of a movie guy too, so I sort of make that correlation to it. What sort of visuals would this music impact? What kind of drama, what kind of emotion would it invoke visually? And I kind of pull from that sort of experience personally. Yeah. So it's like, it's interesting for me to see how each individual, whoever is listening to it, takes away from it. It's almost the same as kind of going back onto writing, like the big message, or the message that any sort of writing provides. I mean, there are different types of writing. There are different reasons that we use these different types of writing, but they all have a message that each person will interpret differently, I think. So how do you, like in your creative process, how do you make it so that people are hearing the right message?
I think that emphasizing that there is no right or wrong message is the right message.
Okay.
I think that a lot of the reason that I do what I do, I think the reason that a lot of artists do what they do is to sort of empower the people that art comes into contact with. So really the only thing that I am trying to achieve with what I do, and this is very subconscious, I never kind of sit down at my computer or my paper and think, you know what, I'm going to empower the hell out of somebody today. But, just letting people know that there is sort of this extra level of emotional interaction that seems to be largely absent from this sort of money-obsessed society that we're part of. There is more to it than that. And, encountering art can be the breath of life.
Right.
And just letting people know that that's okay. A lot of the writing I do is not super technical. It's pretty accessible for most people.
Yeah.
And it's all about just kind of putting the ideas in front of people, and kind of the interesting thing that I've learned about jazz writing is one of the big cardinal rules is you shouldn't tell people how they should feel about something. You shouldn't be like, oh, when I hear this is what I imagine. It's not about you. So even though you have this deeply personal relationship that you're sort of remarking upon, you divorce yourself so much from that whenever you're making content that is distributed to other people. It's like saying, I'm just putting this in front of you. I'm letting you have the space to be what you want to be in relationship to this thing.
Okay. Yeah, so it's like, you're drawing from personal experiences, but you also want to separate yourself from it enough that people can draw from their own experiences.
Yeah. I think coming from sort of a fictional background, I think that it's easier for me to say, here's the situation, and kind of write it in a way that makes people think, oh man, like I wish that I had been there, and from that they sort of put themselves in that place. They can sort of readily imagine themselves in a place like that. So it's really what I try to do, is to craft scenarios in which people can sort of see themselves. Or conversely, they can certainly not see themselves. It's like, okay, that's a different level of introspection. You've learned something about yourself.
Now, let me Let me pose a challenge to you then.
Do it.
What if someone takes your idea and just, for one reason or another, interprets it in a way that is socially harmful? What would you do in that scenario then? Like, because like you said, any idea, it can be based on a personal experience, but you keep it, vague enough so that people can draw from it in their own way. So what if they draw negative energy from it? They're drawing something that is, dark and brooding, and what kind of, like, how do you really combat that situation? I know it's a tough one.
It is hard because I've never been in a situation where the stakes have been that high. I mean, I used to joke with people whenever I was just going through college, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm a history major. Like, I'm not ever going to kill anybody in my profession.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in kind of the day and age that we live in, it's history and narrative is being weaponized in a pretty perturbing way. I'm not sure how responsible a writer should be, or any type of artist should be, once work kind of leaves.
Right.
I mean, that's a question that has sort of interesting historical roots as well. Do violent films and violent music lead people to do violent things and whatnot?
Yeah, and that's kind of a hot topic now.
Again, video games and violence.
And that's ongoing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's like violence in media, has existed. And this was a discussion I had in the last episode of the podcast, where we had, was violence in media has existed since the beginning of time.
Oh, absolutely.
Or the influence of it. Or since the beginning of, the age of storytelling, the age of writing, the age of, communicating these tales that can invoke this sort of these sort of ideas. And that can also be, they can be positive ideas, or they can be positive influences, but at the same time they can invoke negative thoughts, negative emotions. And that could be, at least from my perspective, could be said true for any sort of medium, in a sense. So yeah, I mean, that's a very good, that's a very interesting response. And to sort of that idea is like, how responsible should you be with this idea that you're just throwing out there into the ether?
Right. And it's also interesting because it's going to sound like I'm dancing around the question, but very few ideas are original in nature.
Yeah.
So it's like, how much responsibility can you truly, allot to a single person or a single creator?
Absolutely.
I think, I think it's going to take a big communal effort. If something that I write invokes the sort of strange, abstract response, or maybe perfectly justified response, it's not one person's job to kind of circumvent that or deal with that. If something that I write makes somebody that angry, there are other sort of situations that we have to look at, because that kind of response would be symptomatic of something. It wouldn't really be the sickness in and of itself.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with psychology and sort of the human mind and how it works. And so would you say that, you know, if you were to say, or if you were to hear the term like history repeats itself, you know, is that true because of this, you know, that everyone is just going to kind of interpret their own ideas, and that, you know, the positive, you know, everyone's going to take their own message from it, positive or negative, and it's just sort of kind of like, are we doomed to be in a cycle where it's, you know, we're never going to really live in an ideal world?
This is a question that I always like to ask my students on their finals.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the responses. I think just kind of going back to that idea that no action or thought is truly original. You know, I think we sort of are kind of doomed to repeat these phases because, in part, a lot of these issues are not being dealt with.
Okay.
Whether or not we actually have the resources to deal with a lot of these issues is another matter entirely. It's an important point worth considering. But, yeah, don't know where I was going with that.
Well, I think I mean, honestly, it's very open-ended. So, there probably isn't really a right answer to it.
We're going to figure out the answers to all of these questions here tonight, Stephen.
We're going to solve all of the world's problems.
Yep, it's going to happen right here in Southside.
In the tiny room in a row house.
Exactly.
What is the meaning of life?
I'm having a stroke not saying 42 right now.
I mean, you can say that.
42.
Oh, okay.
We're fantasy freaks and fan fiction writers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only reasonable response.
Speaking of books and reading, what's on your current I guess it's not really summer reading anymore. It's like fall-ish, but it's still
Autumnal reading.
It feels like summer outside. But what's on your reading list? So,
on my bookshelf right now, I'm a huge J.D. Salinger fan.
Okay.
Love J.D. Salinger. And I'm currently reading Seymour: An Introduction, which is not necessarily a super common pick. A lot of people just kind of affiliate Salinger with Catcher in the Rye and Franny and Zooey and whatnot. Seymour: An Introduction is one of my favorite stories. So digging back into that's one of those things that I reread about the same time every year, just to kind of revisit and see how it makes me feel. I'm reading Questlove's Creative Quest, which is awesome. I highly recommend that to any creative type or anybody who's sort of trying to maybe explore it a little bit more. Questlove is tight. You should get the audiobook if you are able to. And I am sort of flipping through Miles Davis's autobiography, which is stranger than any fictional book that I have ever read.
Yeah.
Any musical person you've ever heard of anywhere, cross-genre, is likely to come up in this book. It's very, very interesting. Again, something I like to kind of revisit. It's a little too long to kind of read from front to back. But those are sort of the big things on my list right now.
Very cool.
What's on your reading list, Stephen? What are you reading?
So I'm still trying to get through the first book in the Expanse series, which is science fiction series. They actually started because I read a lot of stuff that's based on, I read a lot of stuff that eventually is the basis for other media, such as television or movies. So they actually made an Expanse TV show, which is like fantastic. Actually, that's what I started with, and then I found out it's based on a book series. So I started reading that, and it's really awesome. And highly recommend either one, book or TV show.
Is it British? Is either from British creators?
No, actually, it's
Okay.
it's from writers that I believe they worked under George R.R. Martin.
Cool.
So it has kind of that feel to it. It's like this, but it's sci-fi, which is kind of cool.
Mm.
So, and then I was actually rereading The Hobbit with him. I just wanted to reread that series because I rewatched all the movies recently, and anything by Neil Gaiman. I'm like a super huge fan of Neil Gaiman.
Mm-hmm.
So I just finished the Graveyard book. I'm starting Good Omens because they also just made that into a series. I haven't watched it yet because I want to read the book first.
That's so noble of you.
Yeah. Which was also co-written by Terry Pratchett.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And yeah, that's basically what's on my list.
Are you a Harlan Ellison fan?
No, I can't say.
Oh man,
Know any work?
That'll ruin your life. Oh, it's so good. He sort of really kind of pioneered sort of a subgenre of sci-fi. You should
really?
definitely check him out. He's a weird dude.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, he does a lot of time travel type of stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Into that.
Yeah. Right.
Definitely,
Yeah.
because there's so many things like thematically that you can get from time travel, and just I feel like time travel just teaches us. You shouldn't. Most of the time, you shouldn't fuck with how things are.
Word.
So
I've watched enough Doctor Who. I know what's
Yeah.
good, and enough time travel episodes of Star Trek.
yeah, I still need to catch up on Doctor Who. I kind of fell off after Matt Smith.
I did too. I fell off at exactly the same time.
I mean, I have nothing against like anything after that. I just kind of didn't pick back up after that.
I think the storylines got a little too convoluted once Stephen Moffat started writing all of the episodes. Russell T Davies, it's like, this is somewhat more digestible.
That's true.
You know?
I did like Davies a lot more just because it. Not only that, but it was more. I don't know. There's just something to it. I like the feel of them. I like just. I think it was more digestible, and just the characters were more likable, in a sense.
I think it just paid homage to the genre a little bit more concisely. The human dramatic aspect of it, I feel like, wasn't sort of central in a way that it was after Moffat started writing, which isn't to say that I dislike Moffat's writing at all, but it's like, okay, like there's the sci-fi kitsch. Like this is like nod to 1960s sci-fi, you know? And there are so many little Easter eggs in Davies' stuff as far as references to like Douglas Adams and stuff. I mean,
Right.
got episodes named 42, and the fact that characters carry towels and bathrobes with them everywhere, you know? So it's just fun. It's just more fun.
Yeah, that's true. I'll have to like check out because they have a new writer now. I'll have to check out his stuff and see how, or a new showrunner rather, see how that compares to the previous two. What's what do you do when you're not like, let's say, besides you know, everything that we've talked about, you know, how do you unwind?
I really, really enjoy physical activity of any kind.
Yeah.
I have started getting a little bit more into cooking lately because my family on my mom's side is very Italian, and that's something I'm very proud of. Mm-hmm. And you can't really be an Italian who doesn't know how to cook.
Right.
So that's something I've been spending a lot of time doing lately. I'm really boring outside of the stuff that I do professionally. There's really not a whole awful lot going on. So it's...
I think we all have that side, that private side of us that is just kind of, you know,
yeah.
It is. You can take it or leave it.
Yeah. I think that's why I stay so busy, because, like, who I am when nobody is around is very boring. Yeah. So it's like, if I just stay busy, I don't ever have to indulge that part of myself.
I mean, I'm sure that can be interpreted, like, based on anyone's interpretation.
I do like collecting records, since we were talking about turntables before this.
Oh,
I love collecting weird out records. I've got a lot of like just computer noises and Orthodox Jewish weddings on vinyl. Things that really no reasonable human being should own. I have a record by a gentleman who identifies as the Rappin' Reverend. You should go to YouTube and find this. He wrote this song called I Ain't Into That. And it's basically like, I mean, this brother is amazing. He basically he goes on the record and says, you know, some people are into drugs, some people are into gang activity, but I ain't into that, you know? And so it's kind of a hidden gem in my collection. Not a lot of people know about this, but you should check out the Rappin' Reverend. I ain't into that. The cover is so intense. It's just his picture in some very plain font. It's very minimalist, very proto-minimalist, and it works on some level. But yeah. Also starting to get more into Italian giallo films as of late. So
I don't even know. What is that?
So it's sort of a this is oversimplifying it, but it's sort of like the Italian horror genre.
Oh yeah,
it's like Dario Argento type of stuff, and it's I think distinct from American horror because it is sort of inherently kitschy. It is sort of over the top.
Yeah.
The soundtracks are really just profoundly awful. So. My partner is he's a film studies major from Hopkins who gave it up to play music. So it's interesting because I like film. I like learning a lot about it. But before I met him, I had never seen an Orson Welles film before, admittedly enough. So yeah, just kind of digging deeper into that arbitrary rabbit hole.
Yeah, it can definitely be quite a journey if you're not careful.
I believe you.
So is there anything else that you want to promote?
Sure. So you know, if anybody happens to be interested in learning a little bit more about what I do, I found out very early on when I started doing this that there really aren't people doing what I do on such a narrow level. I really didn't have anybody to turn to say, hey, how do I do any of this? Yeah. What is the best way to get a website going? What's the best way to promote myself? On my website, which is www.deepgreenink.com, all one word, I am in the process of getting a blog uploaded that basically documents my frantic thoughts and puts them all in one place, because people should know that if they are embarking on this, that they are not alone. I list a little bit of my services over there, my portfolios over there, which is really cool. I am partnering up with the newest jazz club in Pittsburgh called Con Alma. It is in Shadyside. It's on Ellsworth Avenue. We have some really exciting programming coming up for people who are interested and fearless enough to kind of jump in headfirst to this music. We have some interesting musicians coming in from out of state, a couple of New York cats that are coming in, which is really cool. We're going to be doing a week-long celebration of John Coltrane, who is sort of the gateway to a lot of musicians. Ray Manzarek from The Doors is a huge Coltrane fan. Former President Bill Clinton was a huge Coltrane fan. We're going to be celebrating his life later on this September. Also going to be celebrating a couple of Pittsburgh musicians next month as their birthdays fall in the month of October. More information on that and the really kind of stupidly amazing food and beverage menu is available at conalmapgh.com. That's conalmapgh.com. We have over 60 jazz events happening every week in Pittsburgh. If you want to learn more about those, you can check out WZUM's Jazz Central calendar or pittsburgh.jazznearyou.com.
Awesome. And you already mentioned like your website, blog. How, if people want to kind of follow you and what you do, how can they do that?
I am on Instagram. You can follow me at Mackenzie Horne 23. You will get daily music recommendations, whether you ask for them or not. You'll get the occasional picture of plates of food and occasional beautiful landscapes. My aesthetic is very consistent. I don't know how interesting it is, but it is consistent. You can find me there. You can also find me on Twitter at KenzieHorne23. Not as active as I want to be, but maybe if I have some people to interact with me and validate me in some way, maybe I would be a little bit more active on it. You can also find me on good old-fashioned Facebook.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. So thanks for joining and giving me sort of a little piece of your mind and, you know, your perspective on things in the world of such as writing and jazz.
This was a really good conversation, Stephen.
Yes.
I appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you.
Oh, man.
And that wraps up this episode of Decipher the Media. Please follow Mackenzie and all that she does on social media at her website, www.deepgreenink.com. You can also find her on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can also learn more about what she does at Con Alma. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to conalmapgh.com. And like I said, definitely go check out more that she does and the community that she's involved in, because it's very interesting and it's very wonderful to talk to her about all of those things. We have a lot coming up in the future episodes. I'm finally going to get this on a regular schedule. That is definitely going to happen now that I have a good idea of where I'm taking the podcast. So you can expect to see more episodes consistently. We're going to try to keep it around, a 2-week release schedule, or at the very least, a month between each episode release. But definitely pushing for every 2 weeks we'll have a new episode for you. I have a lot of other projects going on right now, so I would like to do more, but unfortunately I can't do more. But I think this is a very doable thing, that schedule that I have in place right now. So I really look forward to posting up more content here soon. I already have a couple more creative individuals in the pipeline that are going to come on the talk or that have already come on the talk. And we've had some great conversations, and I can't wait to share those with you and share more about what goes on in creative media. So with that, I will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching, if you're watching this. And please go like, subscribe, tell your friends about this. It really helps to kind of get this out there and show people, you know, what creative individuals are doing in our community. I just love having these conversations with them, and just you know, love sharing stories with them. So please, 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 you know, pass this around. So you know, it really motivates me to keep doing this. So thank you so much. I will see you next time.